Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to part two of our extraordinary discussion with Robert L. Kuhn, who is one of America's top intellectuals. And we're so pleased to have him on again for part two. We spent part one talking about the situation in China, which was really elucidated a lot for me. We want to talk a little bit about the current hot war in the Middle East, which is, of course, the war that the United States and Israel have with Iran. And we want to get your, I mean, you are a giant thinker, Robert, and one of the things that's almost like your hallmark issues that you tackle are the issues of absolute truth, faith, idealism, and God. And it's almost like these entities at the same time reinforce and contradict potentially each other. Um, can you talk about the Iranian situation from that perspective and kind of like put that in the under the umbrella of faith, absolute truth, idealism, and God?
That's a big question, Niger. It's good to see you, and I love engaging on these kinds of questions because what I do, particularly with Closer to Truth, which is my 25-year public television on PBS stations and global.
Wonderful show.
Thank you. Now a global resource, and we focus on four areas. We focus on what we call cosmos, which is cosmology, physics, mathematics, the nature of existence. Second is life, the philosophy of biology and evolution. Third is brain, mind, consciousness, free will, personal identity, alien intelligences, AI intelligence, everything having to do with brain and mind, which is my original field, which you can see by these crazy paintings in the background. And the fourth category we call meaning, which is basically global philosophy of religion, which takes a philosophical approach to all the great religious traditions and understands the deep nature of it. We're not sectarian in looking at individual religions from a sociological or a practice point of view, but the deep underlying philosophy of all of that. And so that's the rubric on with which I look at all issues. I follow the geopolitics very closely. I am, of course, specifically engaged with China, and China is involved with everything that's going on in the world,
Sure.
politically, economically, militarily, no matter what. So I do that for that reason, but I do it also because of great personal interest that I have carried for a long time. But I look at it through the lens, as you said, of Closer to Truth, which takes the issues that you say, and others as well as I described it, and looks at it from a rigorous point of view. And so I will try, whenever I'm interviewing a guest, I will take the opposite point of view. So I'm always in the minority. If I'm talking to an atheist, I will be a theist. If I'm talking to a theist, I'll be an atheist. And so people are sometimes confused on what I believe, but what I
No, but
believe
it's provocative, but it's provocative to promote more dialogue and
exact
exchange.
to promote more dialogue and I want to get the best thinking out of the best thinkers, and you do that by provoking and pushing on them, which is what I like to do. And so you're asking me a broad question about the Middle East under the way I think. And
Yes.
I'll start this way, and this is really important to me. When I started Close to the Truth, I started like almost 30 years ago, but it's been broadcasting for now its 26th year. I had one motivation, and that's to get the best thinking in the world on these big topics: brain, mind, consciousness, God, the nature of the universe, nature of existence, and not to favor any one idea, but to get the best thinking on all of these ideas. One motivation. Then, fairly recently, I'd say right around COVID time, because people were locked in their homes and Closer to Truth then began to have a worldwide, literally explosion in terms of people watching from all over the world. And I began to notice something. And it became much more apparent, 2, 3 years later, 2022, 2023, that we were getting, in the past, the comments we would get were almost 100% for the US because our PBS television show was only on US stations. But over time, more and more foreign people would comment. And so today, more than 50% come outside of the US.
That
And
is very much like TvAbraham, where the United States is our first audience, but our second largest audience is the Middle East and the
yeah,
Muslim world, including Indonesia.
yeah, and that's true. And we found the same thing. And in particular, I found that from the Muslim majority countries and from India, from the Indian
Hmm.
traditions, we have had great input. And I began to notice that when people would write to us, they would write from countries that, in the political sphere, were opposed to each other. India and Pakistan,
Right.
Russia and Ukraine, Iran and Israel. Um, uh, Many from African countries that had disputes with each other, Nigeria and Rwanda, yeah,
Hmm.
all different countries that have their own internal conflicts. And what I noticed was, from all these different people, not a single one of them talked about the political differences. That wasn't of
Mm.
interest. They were all only interested in the nature of consciousness or the existence of God or the nature of God. And I began to see that the kinds of questions that we ask, rather than being just selfishly because I like to know these things, is actually a way to show humanity
The
that we are
connections between humanity.
it's the same. We all have the same question. It doesn't matter your race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation. Nothing matters to these people except the fascination with these important questions. And that made me realize that that's another way to think about problems.
Yeah,
About
and
let
almost to supersede
to
these
supersede.
local
Exactly.
rivalries between countries
Right.
to come to a higher philosophical,
Right.
existential
Right.
point of view and discussion and context.
Right. And I would say that there are some countries in the world that seem to have a higher degree of interest in these topics. It's hard to judge because they have different populations, but I would say Iran, along with India, are two of the countries where people have shown great interest in these philosophical subjects. And to me, that is really encouraging in terms of the people of Iran.
You said
Now,
Iran and India?
Iran and India are two countries that people, when they write, again, nobody talks about politics in any way, but show a deep interest in these philosophical
And
questions.
Robert, let me ask you something, because historically speaking, you've got, except for the mullah, what I call the malocracy of the
Yeah,
last 50 years, you have two beautiful, old, ancient
right,
civilizations that have been
right,
dealing with these kinds of existential questions
right.
for 4,000 years.
Exactly, and in very sophisticated and very genuine ways, and that has impressed me. I didn't plan on doing that, but and because of that, we then shifted on Closer to Truth because in the early years we focused in our philosophical approach to religion on basically Christian philosophy. Because that a lot of good philosophy was done in the Christian world,
Sure.
many very distinguished philosophers who were very good philosophers, forgetting their religious belief, but were very good philosophical interests, and to a lesser degree from the Jewish tradition and the Islamic tradition. But when I began to see this, I then said we need to focus more on a global philosophy of religion. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we have done that. We have really emphasized Islamic philosophy, Hindu philosophy, Buddhist philosophy primarily, and a little bit of some of the other traditions, African traditions. We have featured each of these in different ways. And to me, that's given a much richer understanding of this. This was an idea pioneered by a very dear friend, Professor Eugen Nakasawa, who at that time is a philosopher of religion and philosopher of mind at the University of Birmingham. We did a joint venture with them on global philosophy. He's now at the University of Oklahoma and has been a pioneer. And he's a very diverse guy. He's Japanese, and Japanese don't have a tradition of philosophy. Got his a PhD in Australia and worked in England, now in the U.S. So he's very much an international person, but is very appreciative of these differences. And I've again seen the interest from the Islamic world in terms of our topics, and we have now featured some of the leading Islamic philosophers that we've brought to the world in very deep ways, and so that's a major contribution. But when we juxtapose that with the current situation, it seems like we're talking about apples and oranges. One has almost nothing to do with one another, but it's my view that they really do have something to do with one another. And if we can appreciate that the people in these countries, not the leaders, not the people who think they have the answers to the world, but the people really have these rich traditions, as you say, I think that'll give us a broader perspective on how we look at each other, as opposed to the inevitable sectarian sense of us and them, and who's killing more innocent people,
Well, one
which
of the
is a
things
tragedy.
that President Trump has segregated in terms of Iran, and I think this goes to your point, is the mullahs that we are at war with from the Persian, what I like to say, the Persian people itself
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the Persian civilization itself, which is quite different and quite profound,
yes.
as you say. Well, you have been Robert, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time. In the few minutes I have left with you, we could do this talk for 3 hours easily. But in the few minutes I have left with you, let me be selfish and ask about America. America is the largest, most important superpower in the world, with a hat tip to the rise of China. We are still the most powerful nation in not only in the world, but in the history of the world. Where are we headed? And the way I pose my question to you is, do we have another 100, 200 years of the American centuries? Or are we headed to the graveyards of empires like ancient Rome and even the British Empire?
Well, I would say that America is not in the mode of the Roman or British Empire. Historically, we have not been a conqueror and a colonizer. Been some examples, but in generally not. But what America has done is set the playing field, the international playing field, the rule of law, the international rule of law, so that everyone can be on the same level and can optimize their own economy. There's no country that has benefited more from the American rule than China has. China has been the biggest beneficiary of the stability and consistency that American power has put in the world. So there's no doubt about that.
Right.
Now, as we go forward, the world changes. I mean, right now we have a Security Council who have veto power. You have U.S., Russia, and China, big countries, but you have France, England, and you don't have India. Now, India is a
Which is
rising power.
crazy.
Yeah, and
The largest democracy in the world.
it's the largest country. It exceeded China in terms of population in the last year.
Wow.
So it's 1.4 billion. It's close. China's now second to India. But France doesn't want to get off to let India in, and if you let India in, what about Brazil? I mean, it's a complicated world today. But I think a trend that is the case is that the world is becoming multipolar. And that does not mean a decline of the U.S. It is a product of the goodness uh, and
The rules-based order that
the
we
rule,
established.
and that's the what the U.S. So it's in a sense, if you look at it this way, the growth of other countries to where it becomes a multipolar world is the children of the U.S. The U.S. has given birth, push the analogy, to these other countries, and now they're becoming more equal to their parent. Uh, and in the proper world, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
So
Uh,
you think that it leans we lean a little bit closer to another century or two of American rules-based order that establishes, that gave birth, if you will, to this multipolar power situation that
Yeah,
we have.
I can't put dates on it and how it occurs, and I think recently, in terms of U.S. Activity with relationship with other countries, it's been obviously strained, and so it's hard to see where it goes. But in terms of the U.S., but I think what's clear is we are having a multipolar world, and other countries are taking more responsibility. In some cases, and each one has to be analyzed. When you talk about China, many people think China wants to take over the world, replace the U.S. That's not true. What is true is that China wants its to be a major player, and people to recognize China as the best source of anti-poverty, of technology, and all sorts of things in the future.
And it
So
seems to
China,
me that their ambition, the Chinese ambition, is to basically make sure that they control their own neighborhood, which a
oh,
lot of countries have as an endeavor.
sure, and mainly to give legitimacy to themselves in their own right, their neighborhood, but also their neighborhood is now the world, because China is the greatest trading nation with almost 120 countries are trade more with China than with anyone else. So China does have a global footprint. The Belt and Road, as we've talked about,
Sure.
it has very substantial international implications. But China does not want to be the world policeman, because that's a burden. The U.S. is not didn't do that like the Roman Empire to conquer. The U.S. assumed a burden for
Yes.
the benefit of humanity.
Yes.
And some people may now criticize that, but that's
Including the President of the United
right,
States.
right, right. Look, listen, we could talk and argue about that. I argue about that in my own family. I have two on one side and two on another, and I'm sort of
That's great. That's the way it should be.
yeah. But
You still have Thanksgiving dinner together
yeah,
though.
exactly, exactly. But some things sometimes we don't talk about too publicly.
Well,
um,
Robert L. Kuhn, if folk want to get your articles and that type of thing, of course, they can watch your 30-year-old broadcast on PBS, Closer to Truth. But where can they see your writings, your op-eds, and the like, and your
Yeah,
videos?
I mean it's just on the internet. Just Google my name, and I have various categories closer to truth on these topics. I have a very big presence in consciousness studies that I've done a lot of work. So many papers I've written on the nature of consciousness, and of course a lot of things I've written on China. I have a new book coming out soon about Xi Jinping's policies over the last 10 years, and I write constant articles about China as well. So Google me, probably find a lot of.
I feel very confident that most in our audience are going to do that. You are a fascinating interview, and I've got one last question to close these two segments, and that is the old Ronald Reagan question, but to expand it to humanity. Is humanity better off today or 100 years ago?
Wow, that's a tough question. Literally, if you say today, because we have things going on today which create a difference, not just in amount but in kind. And social media is one. It changes the whole perception of what we can do. And 100 years ago, leaders could deliberate, can send ambassadors, notes back and forth outside of the public eye. You can't do that today. Everything is in the public eye, and instantly the entire literate world knows everything that's going on, and there's a lot of fake stuff going on too. So it's a very complicated world because of that. So it depends what you mean better off in terms of less volatility.
Let's take your words in terms of achieving or reaching absolute truth, God, or the other issues that you had. The idea was four.
Yeah,
There are four. In terms of that, are we
yeah.
better off and closer to
Yeah,
that?
well, we certainly know a lot more, and I believe, and again, I look at it from maybe a parochial point of view, that there are more people in the world today interested in these big questions of existence and human sentience and objective or relative morality, the big questions of existence. And I think that is a very good trend. And I'm doing my little part in promoting it, but the more that occurs, the better off we will be. If
And
more,
that's because we'll discover we have much more in common in
for
terms of the
sure.
questions that we're asking than we have petty differences.
Exactly. Who owns what rock and what position versus a deep understanding of the nature of human consciousness? To me, there's no, one is the highest expression of humanity, and one is among the lowest.
Well, I
Uh,
can't think of a better way to end this magnificent interviews that we had with you. Robert L. Kuhn, thank you so much for joining us on TV Abraham. And I'm going to sign off like I always do. My great father, who you know of, Roy Ennis, longtime civil rights hero who's no longer with us, used to always say to me, Niger, when you pursue endeavors in life, make sure that you pursue them with TLC. And I don't mean tender love and care. I mean truth, logic, and courage. Some
Wonderful,
terms
wonderful,
that you are very familiar with,
wonderful.
Robert. Uh,
Roy was a great man, a great contributor, and you're following well in his footsteps.
I appreciate that. You're making me blush. If I was white, I'd be red. Robert, you have a wonderful week, and we're going to have you on again because we just tipped the iceberg of issues we can discuss.
Good. Well, I look forward to it and see you next time.
Okay, all the best.